author, Tim. The name of the book is Beyond the Seventh Gate, and I'm excited to have him on the show. He originally started doing this book to look into the paranormal of this particular area of Pennsylvania, and then as he started researching it, as he started talking to witnesses, he realized, I don't think that this is paranormal. I think this is more Sasquatch related. I know one of the items coming up tonight is the term the Hidebehind. And for the listeners out there, a Hidebehind is a nocturnal, fearsome critter from American folklore that preys upon humans, that wanders the woods. It's accredited to the disappearances of early loggers that failed to return to camp. It's interesting, as you look up this term, the Hidebehind, and as I talked to Tim tonight, I have talked to people in the South, and they don't use the term Grassman, they don't use the term Bigfoot, they don't use the term Sasquatch. But one of the gentlemen I was talking to, he kept referring to it as the Hidebehind. And I didn't really understand what he meant by the Hidebehind. And he finally broke it down for me. He said it's a creature that hides behind trees. And if you're ever in a group of people and you're walking down a trail and you're the last person in line, the Hidebehind will get you. And they'll drag you back to your lair, back to its lair and eat you. And so I thought that was interesting. But I hope you guys enjoyed the show tonight as I talk with Tim. Again, the name of the book is Beyond the Seventh Gate. You'll find the link in the description below. My guest on Sunday is going to be a ex-game warden. He's a current police officer. He shared with me a game cam video that they got, and there's a whole story behind that. But if you get a chance, check that out too on the website. If you've had an encounter and you'd like to be on the show, shoot me an email. My email address is wes@sasquatchchronicles.com. And let's jump into it tonight. Tim, welcome to the show. Thanks for being here tonight, man. I appreciate you coming on.
Oh, thanks for having me.
And if you would, you wrote a book, Seventh Gate, and I was really interested by the email you sent me regarding the two brothers and one of them describing one of the creatures as being kind of odd-looking, an odd color. If you would, for the audience, talk a little bit about the Seventh Gate. What did you look into? What did you find? And walk us right into some of the experiences from the book.
Sure thing. Yeah. Well, this all has to do with South Central Pennsylvania. It started some years ago. I've always been interested in kind of just weird stuff, ghost stories and Bigfoot stories and stuff like that. And I kind of followed the local legend stuff. When I first moved to the area, which would be in the mid-1990s or so, I was told about this legend called the Seven Gates of Hell. And at that time, it was never associated with Toad Road. And there's been a horror movie made called Toad Road, which is vaguely sort of kind of about the legend there. It's supposed to be, but it takes elements of the legend, not the truth. But as I was saying, when I originally came here, the so-called Seven Gates of Hell were not associated with Toad Road. It was a different legend. And my wife had gone to day camp right near Toad Road as a child, and there's another road that parallels it. And they had told her at day camp the story was, "Don't look behind you on Toad Road," and that was pretty much all the information that was out there at the time about it. As time went on, some of these legend hunters and ghost seekers came up with a story about an insane asylum that burnt down back there. This is a road that's been closed since 1973, whenever Hurricane Agnes was. It washed out and it's been closed since then. So it was an outlandish story about an insane asylum that burnt down and the inmates were killed back there, and because of that, there's all these ghosts and so forth. You can find the story on Wikipedia and in the Weird USA type books. But that was never the story that I heard, and I really started the book to correct that. I wanted to kind of get into the real story, and the fact is that there's never been an insane asylum back there. In fact, in all of York County, Pennsylvania, there's never been a dedicated building that houses an insane asylum. So right away, you can just take away that part of the story goes away. And as I started digging, though, what I did find is some very, the way I describe it in the book is what people were experiencing was not passive things. In other words, if you talk about ghosts, I think most people think is a very passive thing. They see a ghost, or they maybe hear a ghost or something like this. What was happening back Toad Road, on this closed road, was things that match up with cryptid sightings, in particular Bigfoot. People were being paced in the woods. People were hearing screams. They were seeing eye shine. If you are familiar with, big stories at all of these things match up with really Bigfoot. I started digging into that, and from there, that kind of led me to look up other Bigfoot encounters in the area, and I was completely shocked. I found hundreds of encounters dating back to 1858. Like I said, I was interested in this stuff, but I never really dug up just to see how many would be in the local area. And in fact, York isn't a super isolated county. We have a lot of farmland and we have a lot of woods, but it's not super remote. But I talked to a few other researchers about this, and they said that's not terribly uncommon, that these creatures, with their apparent ability to hide and stay out of our sight, that they are either getting closer or they just tend to live closer, especially to farms where they can get easy food. While I was digging in the area of Toad Road, I found a news story. It was a very short clip from the paper from 1973, I believe, and as a local man, it was December 1st, 1973 at 5 a.m. A man was attacked by what he called a green-haired monster and was sent to the hospital with scratches on his face. The police were sent out and they found a monster. Now, that's all that was in the newspaper. I've tried to track down the guy to talk to him about it, and he has no internet presence. He has no phone number that's listed. So I don't know if he maybe just doesn't want to be contacted. But when I heard the story with the two brothers, when they mentioned the green-haired Sasquatch or the gray-haired one that had, I believe they said it was green at the tips of the hair or at the end of the hair, it just rang a bell for me immediately. I just, because it was such an odd thing that I found this newspaper story about this green-haired monster attack.
Did the brothers actually describe what attacked them besides being green-haired?
It was one fella that was attacked. And in the newspaper, it just said a green-haired monster. That's all they said. But again, with all the other sightings I have back in the area, it just seems, it's pointing towards something odd. Like, to me, it's pointing towards Bigfoot-type creatures.
And you said in that area there's never been an insane asylum?
No, there's never been. There was never an insane asylum. I remember I confronted the people, and I remember when the story came up, it was the late 90s and early 2000s, and I confronted some people about it. I said, well, my father-in-law does genealogy, and he's lived in the area for ages, so he has tons and tons of these old maps for use in genealogy dating back to the 1800s and early 1800s, I believe. And that road is marked on these maps, but there's never been any buildings like that back there. They show hospitals, they show schools on there, but there's never been any insane asylum back there. So it was just something, at some point, someone either made it up or got confused. There were some buildings nearby that burned down. There was like an old nursing home that was, as the crow flies, nearby. That burned down, that people may have confused into that, but when confronted with that fact that there was no insane asylum back there, the people said, well, it was this crazy doctor who lived back there, which and he kept patients in his house. There was a doctor who lived back there, but he was not crazy. He was a very well-respected local physician. He fought in both World Wars, and he was not this mad scientist by any means. He was a very respected member of the community. So it's almost sad that people have started to put, some of this crazy legend on him. And I think I've corrected that in my book. Hopefully I've cleared his name a little bit.
What were people reporting when they go back in the area? What type of things were witnesses reporting?
The most common thing you hear again and again is screams. Loud screams and sustained screams. Screams, people will say the screams that were so loud they hurt my ears. And that just went on and on and on forever. In fact, one of the guys, it's a closed road, it's private property now. You're not supposed to go back there. But I, in the course of writing this book, to get the real story for the sake of reporting, I walked the entire road with some friends of mine. And one of my friends had been there before, and he said he went out at night, and that's what he heard. He said he heard what he described as like a woman screaming, but he said it was incredibly loud back there. So, but that's the most common thing you'll read. The other thing you hear people report is being paced in the woods back there, seeing eye shine. I have collected some things that people said they saw dog heads, which they said were too high in the trees. I guess they meant that it was, higher than a dog would stand. All kinds of, weird stories. And in dealing with it, I've eliminated any stories where anyone talked about an insane asylum. I threw them out the window. Like, well, they're not, it's not back there, so I'm not taking that story.
Was there a report then of people seeing a blue or green monster that they came across back there?
Yeah, that was the newspaper story I found. It was with the green-haired monster, again, that attacked that guy, and I thought it was so crazy, I almost didn't include it in the book. But for the sake of just, reporting everything I found, I put it in there. The book was already in the proof stages when I heard the episode with the two brothers, where they described that one Sasquatch as having the green-tipped gray hair.
Yeah, I thought that was interesting. I've heard that from a few witnesses where they talk about that being, I've heard green, like a green-type monster. And a lot of people might brush that off until you actually start asking the witnesses questions. And when you start asking the witnesses questions, you start to realize really quick there's way too many details for them to just make up some green-haired monster that was chasing them out of the woods. And I don't really have a great answer. Not that it's my job to come up with an answer, but I don't really have a great answer for those people. I don't know if it's a Sasquatch coming out of the swamp. I don't know if it's a Sasquatch that's been rolling and stuff. Sometimes when you talk to some of the Native Americans, they will tell you about the rock giants. Well, and that sounds crazy until you actually hear what they have to say. And they talk about the Sasquatches rolling around in sand. So when the light hits them, they look like rocks. And so they used to call them the rock giants. I think a lot of times with these cases, it's so, sometimes people are so quick to brush it off as you're nuts or you're crazy until you actually stop to hear what they have to say. And then you're like, you know what? I think I know what you mean.
Yeah, and this guy was sent to the hospital. I don't think you get sent to the hospital and then make up a story, to like that. That just seems it would be you'd be opening yourself up to some serious ridicule at the best case scenario, and possibly worse.
Now, he survived his attack?
He did. He lives in Lancaster. Again, he has no internet presence and no phone number, and I'm a little hesitant to just knock on his door and ask him if he wants to talk about a green-haired monster. But I'm hoping maybe a friend of a friend will know, somebody will know this guy, and I'll be able to actually track him down and talk to him.
The book is called Beyond the Seventh Gate. You can get it at Amazon. You can get it at other places too as well. Beyond the Seventh Gate. Is it mainly focused on this one particular situation?
No. What it was is I sort of took that as the starting point. That's why I call it Beyond the Seventh Gate, because I kind of took this seven gates of hell legend that was associated with the insane asylum and all that, and went from there and started finding, other cryptid sightings, and other strange things throughout the area. I have a chapter on werewolves or dogmen. There's a chapter on Mothman type creatures. But my biggest surprise was how many Bigfoot sightings there were. And it does come back to what my wife originally told me. Well, she was my girlfriend at the time, that don't look behind you. What I feel is the true story there on Toad Road. I think people, and the more I research this, the more I think this is common. I think people go out looking for ghosts, and if anything happens that's strange, it's a ghost. I think Baron Coonvo were talking about this one time too, in regards to a cemetery or something, that a lot of people thought, were attributing these screams or whatever was going on there to ghosts and so forth. But really, they match up a lot more with Bigfoot sightings. But as I was going through, I found that there's something from Pennsylvania folklore called the Hidebehind. This was a creature that was supposed to stalk behind people, it was hide behind them. It would peek from the trees, and it often took the last person in line. And once you were taken by the Hidebehind, that no one ever saw you again. The Indians, the Nanticoke, I believe it was, when the Europeans came, they told them two things. They said, don't follow the lights in the forest, and only the bravest person should be the last in line. Because if you look behind and you saw the Hidebehind, I guess you would be struck with fear. I guess that's the mode. But when I found that finally clicked with, all those years ago when my wife told me that story, don't look behind you on Toad Road, that clicked. That was it for me. So here we're connecting it to, this creature. And I think you said before that you had other guests that had known Bigfoot as Hidebehind.
Yeah, as we were talking off the air, I was telling you about a guy in Mississippi, and it was the strangest conversation I ever had with anyone. He never brought up the term Sasquatch. He never brought up the term Bigfoot, but what he would say was to watch out for the Hidebehind. And after about 30 minutes of us talking, I finally stopped and asked him, "What do you mean the Hidebehind?" And he explained to me how the creature, if you're going down a trail, and you're the last person in line, you're probably going to be a meal. And they call it the Hidebehind because it hides behind a tree, and it's a predator. He goes, it's basically what you call a Sasquatch, but down here in the South, we call them Hidebehinds, and that's what they do. And I thought that was interesting. That was the first time I had ever heard anything like that.
Yeah, and I mean, when I found it, I just thought, wow, this is finally, it kind of clicks, and it makes a lot more sense than this, ghost stories about an insane asylum that was never there. So
yeah,
I had other people tell me. One of my friends said his father was riding a motorcycle on this road. He said it would have been in the late 60s. He said his father would not tell him what he saw exactly, but he said he saw an animal that was unlike any he's ever seen before. He said, stepped out in the road in front of me, turned over his motorcycle. He broke his ankle doing it. And my friend said, but he would never describe exactly what he saw to him. His father's dead now, but he said it wasn't like anything else he'd ever seen.
And I think a lot of times with these Sasquatch encounters, they get blamed as paranormal in the sense that, and you even see it sometimes with the Native Americans. Sometimes with the Native Americans, they wouldn't settle in certain areas because they thought they were haunted. And if you ask some of the Native Americans what happened or what's been passed down to them through verbal, tradition, they'll say rocks came out of nowhere, there was screams, there was trees that were pushed over, they would be stalked in the forest, they'd be paced in the forest, but they could never really see what was doing it. And they always originally attributed it to ghosts, and they thought that the place was haunted. And it wasn't until later they realized, oh, right, that's a Sasquatch. That's their MO. That's kind of what they do. But if you ask the original settlers, that's not really what they thought. They thought the place was haunted.
Yeah, I think it's a lot more common that people are attributing what would be cryptid or Bigfoot behavior to something, like you said, paranormal. Because of that, and because of the Hidebehind, I started looking for missing people in the area, and I did find a few. It's really hard to track down found people. In other words, people who maybe were lost and then were found alive. But I was able to find one woman very recently, within the past 3 years, who was dropped off in the area, and she just disappeared. There's no sign of her at all. I guess she was going to see her old family home that was somewhere around the area, and she's just gone. There's no sign of her, nothing. And I found 2 hunters that died in the area. One was assumed to have fallen from his tree stand, and the other was found dead after his shotgun had been discharged twice, and he was found dead. So there is, some missing people and some people who died to go along with the legend. It's not just a legend. It seems like there was something going on back there.
Yeah, and if people get a chance, go Google Hidebehind. You'd be surprised what you come up with. I mean, I was shocked. I know when the guy down in the South mentioned it to me, I'd never heard it before. And I started Googling it, and I was like, holy crap, I can't believe how much information there is about the Hidebehind. And basically, they're describing a Sasquatch is really what they're describing. They just have a different name for it.
That's what I found. I mean, it's the behavior, there's not, at least in Pennsylvania, what I found, there's not a heck of a lot of descriptions of what the Hidebehind looked like. I guess that was the thing. It was hiding, for the most part. But the behavior anyway just matches up with Sasquatch behavior, Yeah,
and they snagged the last person in line.
Yeah, and just all the reports, and you've heard way more than I have, but from the stalking in the woods, the pacing, to snatching people or I believe you said they're opportunist predators,
And that's what you hear a lot of. You hear them being very opportunistic. You hear them being very quick to snag someone if they get a chance. And like I said, the Hidebehind is fascinating. I'm glad you looked into that insane asylum. Sometimes I think as humans, it's easy for us to believe the lore as opposed to what might actually be going on. Like in your case, where it really there was no insane asylum back there. People are hearing screams. They're just, oh, well, that's the ghost of the insane asylum. And when you start looking into it, it's like, okay, well, there was no insane asylum back then.
Yeah, and one of the points I get into in the book is humans. I believe, and it's probably one of the reasons for our success as a species. We tend to want to help each other, and what better way to well, yeah, there you go. I think in general, what better way to draw people out into the woods than a screaming woman or a crying baby? And I mean, these are the sounds that are reported often, and to me, it just seems to go with this kind of stalking behavior.
Yeah, it does. It matches it, and I think you're right. There's a lot of situations to where, especially in I hate to say it was Sasquatch related, but you hear it a lot with encounters to where people, I heard my dog whimpering, or I heard my brother calling, or I heard this, or I heard that, so I went to go check it out. And what an easy way to snag someone if you can mimic something that they'll come check out.
Yeah, I mean, it just seems it's sinister, but what do we do when we hunt? We use calls, It's the natural way to hunt if you can make the calls, if you can call something in.
The book again is called Beyond the Seventh Gate, and there's other sightings in the book. If you would, Tim, what other sightings are in the book? Yeah,
I tried to make a complete sort of a timeline listing of Bigfoot sightings. I found so many. In just basically York, Adams, and Lancaster County, Pennsylvania is where I limited my search to. And I found hundreds of sightings dating back to 1858. There was, the first one I found was from Lancaster. It was, of course, they called them wild men back then, and they described it as a man, something in the shape of a man, but was covered with hair like a bear. And the really interesting thing about that is the farmer caught this creature suckling his cow. So it was just taking milk right from the cow.
Really?
Yeah. And when he stumbled on it, it jumped up and ran away. But it was the quote in the paper was, it was afflicting children and livestock. So that was the earliest one I found. That one was pretty interesting. There's some that a lot of times again coincidentally with what we were talking about, at least in the papers here, they would call them spooks. They would call them ghosts that took the form of a hairy man sometimes. So I have quite a few that were talked about as spooks, but they were chasing people. You know, one said it had the dual form of a man and a bear. Was chasing people that men, which they said the funny part of that article is it said men had stopped calling on their women at night because they were afraid of getting chased by this what they call a hairy spook that had the dual form of a man and a bear. That was in Hanover, Pennsylvania. And it goes on. I mean, I just have so many. I'm trying to find some of the most interesting ones. The Gettysburg Gorilla I detail that. That was in 1921, just an ongoing, basically throughout the year of 1921, they had ongoing sightings throughout Adams County. Really interesting. At the time, the mountain gorilla had recently been discovered, or not really discovered, but Europeans and Western people came familiar with it. So they started calling the creatures gorillas in the paper. And it was seen several times throughout the area. They tried to shoot it several times. They said it would just elude them. And on January 20th, 1921, in Adams County, a huge gorilla was spotted and chased throughout the area. They said that they kind of formed a posse. 50 men gathered and tried to capture or shoot the creature, but it eluded them. Sightings continued throughout the 20s. Throughout 1921, rather, throughout the whole year. Two men saw it on a golf course. It was on all fours, and they said that they called it the creature. It stood up and started approaching them, and they described it as making gurgling sounds, which to my mind calls to mind some of the samurai chatter. The really interesting part was in early August of that year, it actually walked in. I have a suspicion that it was probably more than one creature that they were just reporting as the gorilla, because there were so many sightings throughout the area. I suspect it was probably more than one. But what they call the Gettysburg Gorilla, it actually walked into the town of Gettysburg, right down York Street, which is one of the major streets there in Gettysburg. It walked behind a woman's house, scared her. She ran to her neighbor, and he came out with a shotgun. He shot it, dropped it to the ground, went over to look at it. It jumped up and chased him back into his house. And once he got inside, they said it eventually headed off in another direction. They found his footprints, but that's it.
Did they describe that creature?
Yeah, they describe it as a hairy gorilla, is what they said. And there were a lot of early on, no one was believing them, but there ends up being so many witnesses that they just couldn't discount them after all, and it became something that was taken seriously in the paper, but something that which they very proudly called the Gettysburg Gorilla. They called it the one and only original Gettysburg Gorilla. But that's what they described it as. And this is what made me think there was more than one creature. Sometimes it's described as huge. Other times they say it's 5 foot tall, which, as you know, these things go, is not huge. The last sighting in 1921 was of a creature that was 5 foot tall. It walked across the road in front of a guy. His horse almost bolted, and just stepped over a fence and kept going. And that's the last reported sighting.
That's interesting. They're describing it like a gorilla. You know, even in descriptions today, that's kind of what you hear from witnesses. Sometimes, not always, but you hear that same type of description, like it was a gorilla on the loose, or it was a gorilla in size. There was a lot of sightings of it, but was there any major aggression out there that you had gotten reports of?
As far as the Gettysburg Gorilla, just the one that was shot, but I do have some others, some interesting sightings. There was outside of the town called Glen Rock, which is in southern York County. This is about 1966. There were sightings of what they called a gorilla, and one steer was found dead and mangled, and there were several other livestock deaths that were blamed on the creature. Around the same time, there was a woman in another town not far away from there, and she said that she found footprints with a 5-foot stride, but she said she just had an unexplained pounding on her roof at times, like something would get on her roof and just pound on her roof. And a lot of these witnesses did not want to be identified. They were, in fact, the one I'm about to tell you about in Delta, they actually said, if you say our name, we will deny ever saying this. We don't want to be identified. And that was a family who was reporting several incidents. They said the creature, this is in Delta in York County, they said the creature would cry, and it was so loud it would wake up the mother at night as it would come towards their house. And they said it would howl as it was in the distance, and it would turn into growls as the creature approached. And they said that it got more and more bold over time. It started picking up the garbage cans, probably going through them, I don't know. And it started coming onto the back porch of their house repeatedly. They said they felt the creature was haunting them. That's the way they described it. Like it just wouldn't leave them alone.
That's interesting. Because, even reports today I take of people, they don't use the term haunting, but what the term they will use is they feel like it's focused on them. It won't leave them alone. They feel like it's focused on them. Even the two brothers I talk about that brought your attention to the show, if you ask those two guys, what they'll say is they feel like the creature's focused on them.
Right. Yeah. That's what they said. If they don't come out at night, they said they'll bang on the house.
They'll bang on the house. Yeah, they're having all kinds of problems with it. It's almost like if they don't really want to pay attention to it, but they feel like if they don't go out and pay attention to it, it's 1,000 times worse than if they do.
Right.
So it's kind of a no-win situation. And it's an interesting situation, too, because it's not really researchers that you're talking to. You can tell these guys aren't researchers. The first questions they asked me is, how do you make these things go away? Before they told me anything was, how do you make them go away? And exactly. My heart went out to them because I didn't have a great answer for them on how do you make them go away. I can give you tips on how I think you can make them go away, but to give you a definite answer, do this and they'll go away, I just can't, because there's no magic bullet. You know what I mean? Right.
I talked to they didn't have a sighting, but a very interesting account. 1978 for some reason was huge in the area for sightings of these creatures. It started out like early in the year. Somebody saw a creature near a local high school that had white eyes, shining white eyes and a foul odor. But before the end of January that year, there's a local farm, and the family had me out on the farm. Very, very nice people. I wanted to talk to them. This happened in 78, but they remembered it like it was yesterday. Super nice family. They were, I told them what I wanted to do, what I was writing about. They invited me out. They showed me where they found the footprints and so forth. And they told me things that weren't in the newspaper article or anything. This is the Hillsmeyer family. They had one night in January, it was cold. They said there was ice and snow everywhere. So to me, that it really takes the possibility of a hoax out of it, of somebody trying to trick them.
Right.
They said they had 2 German Shepherd dogs, and they were just going nuts. I mean, they said they barking and howling, and they could hear them run into the back of their property and run back up to the house, and run to the back of the property and run back up to the house, and just going crazy the night before. And they went out the next day, and they walked to the area where they thought, the dogs were, and they found 2,000 footprints, 16 inches in length, 6 inches in width.
Wow.
They said the depth was such that it had to be, just a very heavy creature, and a 5-foot stride. And they said the stride did not change, even going up sharp inclines. It remained 5 feet. This was, I don't know if have you gotten a lot of the three-toed tracks reports on those?
I've gotten a few, and I don't know what to make of them. I've gotten a few. A lot of times if you are inbred, you'll increase your digits. You won't decrease digits. But I have gotten a few of those, and I don't know what to make of them. I have gotten some three-toed tracks.
Yeah, I know.
Some four-toed tracks. And to be honest with you, I don't know what to make of it. I know that people aren't lying, but I don't know what to make of it.
Yeah, I find it very odd. I think, wasn't down at Boggy Creek, didn't they have some three-toed ones too?
Yeah, three-toed ones, down there in Boggy Creek.
Yeah, but I know Stan Gordon, he's on the other side of the state, but I know he was finding the three-toed prints left and right back in the 70s. I don't know if they continued.
Yeah, three toes almost seems more reptilian, doesn't it?
I guess.
Really, than primate or even canine? I mean, to me, it seems more reptilian.
I have some pictures of casts that were made, not from this particular incident, but from other incidents in the area. I can send you the pictures of the casts. They're very interesting to look at. Looking at the cast and having held the cast, it could be 5 toes that are just kind of I don't know the word for it when your joints kind of fuse together. You know what I mean?
Well, I've seen a three-toe track. I take that back. I have seen a three-toe track, and basically what the creature was doing is it was going uphill. Mm-hmm. And if you look closely, it actually has 5 toes.
Right.
But it was using the 2 center toes together, and then the 2 outer toes off to the right together, and then kind of, I guess you'd say the thumb. I don't know if that's really correct or not, but it was just the way it had placed its foot down and was kind of pulling and pushing on the dirt, on the actual dirt, made it look like 3 toes, even though it really wasn't 3 toes. And so I've always wondered sometimes, is that what people are seeing? I mean, are they looking at that and going, that's a 3-toed print, when it's really not? The one I saw, it was actually climbing uphill, and I don't know if it was pushing its weight in and was trying to level off on its toes as it was stepping. And so it gave the appearance of 3 toes, even though it really wasn't.
Right. And that could, looking at the cast, that could certainly be what was going on here, or it could be, that you can, fingers and toes can get fused together, at birth, and would certainly look like,
yeah, absolutely,
one single print. But anyway, as I'm talking to the family, I asked them, I said, the father is probably in his 70s now. The son is in his 40s or 50s. He was, I think, 16 at the time, and he remembered it like it was yesterday. He was awesome to talk to. But I just kind of casually said the tracks were one in front of the other, right? They weren't offset like humans. And the father looked at me and said, "How did you know that?" I said, "Well, that's what you find again and again. That the stride is just different than ours, and they put one foot in front of the other somehow when they walk." But I asked the mother of the family was there, and I said, "Well, did you guys ever?" I said, honestly, well, they followed the prints that day, and they came upon remains of a rabbit that were in it. It crossed a barbed wire fence, and they found long hair. They still had the hair. They showed it to me. It was over 2 miles of tracks they found. Again, this is in the cold January, ice and snow. And I said, you have so many markings of there's just so much that kind of checks out here. I'm truly surprised you didn't have a sighting of the creature. And I said, did you ever notice anything else? Did you, was there anything that wasn't reported in the newspaper? And at first they're kind of like, well, no, that's the story. And I said, well, what about sounds? Did you ever hear anything? And the mother looked at me, and she kind of, you could tell something kind of clicked, and she said, I heard a scream that came from the direction, the footprints led in the direction of this creek called Muddy Creek. They live right beside it. It's a beautiful area. But she said, I had the windows open that summer following that, and she said, I heard the scream. It was coming from the direction of Muddy Creek. She said it was so loud, and what she described it as was the howl of Mighty Joe Young, the gorilla from the Roots.
Yeah, it's interesting. A lot of times when I talk to people in Pennsylvania or out east, they're always kind of leery on telling you about their encounter because they don't think they're out there, but they are. One I can think of in particular was in Vermont. And I've had a few from Pennsylvania where they run into these things, or they'll hear screams, or they'll hear or see different things. But they're afraid to tell anyone because they think that Sasquatch is California's problem. It's Washington's problem. It's Oregon's problem. It doesn't exist out here. And as you know, Tim, from looking at historically, it's been out there a long time, even, prior to, I would say, anything public in Washington State. If you look up some of these old records, you'll find them out there.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. I was shocked at how many. I thought I'd find a few, and I'd heard of a few before I ever read the book, but I never thought I'd find this many. And as far as, I just can't, some people might make stuff up, but for the most part, witnesses aren't going, they don't have anything to gain from making this stuff up.
That's the thing I always press on the show is people think that people freely come on the show and spill their guts on their encounter. What people don't know behind the scenes is it's really tough to get people to come on the show. If people only knew how hard it was to get someone to come on the show and publicly talk about their encounters, I think most people would be shocked. Especially when you're going back to some of these historical accounts, because they don't know what they're looking at. There is no Finding Bigfoot on TV. They can go watch on TV and go, oh, that's what I saw. They place these weird names on them like Hidebehind or the Corn Man or the Wild Man, because they don't know, or the Gorilla. They don't know what to call it. They can just, give you a general description on what they saw and what they experienced. And that's why I love older accounts like this. And I'm sure you ran across this too with your research, Tim, is people aren't so apt to just want to tell you their story. Sometimes it's like pulling teeth to find out, like what you did. Well, have you ever heard anything? Have you ever heard, you're trying to draw more out of them. Most people don't realize that, and I hope it comes across on the show. It's not easy to get people to come on a show and share an encounter or talk to an author about an encounter. It's like, well, yeah, there it is in the newspaper. There you go. That was it. Well, have you heard anything strange out there? And then they stop and they start telling you, well, yeah, we have heard strange things out here. Sorry to go off on a tangent on you.
Oh, no. I mean, that's exactly what I found. And not to ring the same bell over and over again, but other people I would talk to, they would call me. Word got out. One person talked to another. Oh, this guy's writing this book. So I got a call from a local woman, very nice older woman, doesn't have any internet or anything like that. She's kind of a local historian, and she kind of collects tales of just weird stuff. And all she wanted to talk about was ghosts. And I said, well, I'll listen to ghost stories all day long. I'm fine. But I said, my real interest is, things that leave footprints, things that I can actually, track. And she said, well, there was this thing, and my neighbors were sitting on their porch, and they described this thing that's coming through the brush that sounded like a truck coming through the trees. But and she's just kind of like, well, it was a ghost, like, So I think people, either because, like you said, it's a Sasquatch is a Washington State, California thing in their mind from all they heard, or because it's just easier for whatever reason to chalk it up to supernatural things. I think so many people are just willing to check it off as, oh, it was a spook, it was a ghost, it was something like that.
And it's frustrating at times too. A lot of times, even some Native Americans you talk to, I know here out west, they'll tell you, oh, that was a ghost, or that was this, or that was that. You start asking about behavior, and they're like, well, rocks are thrown, tracks are left, there's screams, trees are pushed over. It's like, I don't think we're talking about a ghost here. I think we're talking about something else. You start putting two and two together, and you realize really quick, we're all talking about the same thing here.
Right, exactly, yeah. And, I I was talking to a good friend of mine about this the other night. He's talking about staying in a supposedly haunted building overnight. I got no problem with that. I'll stay in it. I don't, if there are ghosts, they're not going to, what can I do? But
careful what you wish for, man.
But going out in the woods, by myself, that's, you start adding in these equations. It's like, well, that's a whole other thing. I maybe want somebody with me, at night when I'm doing this stuff.
Well, was there any other stories from the book you wanted to share?
Well, I don't, as far as aggression and things like that, I have, ending out the year in 1978, there was a hunter, near here who was paced in the woods. And he said when he would walk, the creature would walk beside him. And when he stopped, it stopped. And he couldn't figure it out. He said it sounded big, but he couldn't see it. And this was, I believe it was the first day of hunting season. Deer hunting season. And he said some gunshots finally came from another direction. The way it sounds, this again is from a newspaper article, it doesn't sound like they were shooting at the creature. It sounds like these were other hunters that just happened to be shooting. But that must have scared the creature. And he said then he saw it. It came out, veered to the left of him. And he said it was moving faster than any man could move, 7 foot tall, covered in hair, and not human. He said scared him. He left, he turned and came back and found huge tracks. But for whatever reason, 1979 was just a huge year in the area as far as sightings go. And they continue. I mean, they continue up through today. I know some of the Bigfoot societies and stuff have some sightings, which some of them they make public and some of them they keep to themselves. I'm sure they have their reasons, whether people want to remain anonymous or whether they're still working on them or whatever. But I was told at least they have some sightings that they collected from the area. I've got footprints from 2015 and 16, that's an interesting one. This is in northern York County. Guys found footprints and people said they were snowshoe tracks, but they had a 4-foot stride and toes in them, so it probably was not. But at the same time, his neighbors had reported seeing creatures in the woods and hearing wood knocks. And one of them said their dog got beaten up by what they call an orangutan.
That's really interesting.
Yeah, and there's no orangutans in York County. I think there's even an escaped one wouldn't live long, and when it gets cold. This was in the winter. This was end of winter. It was March of 2015. This was going on. So that was an interesting one. I did want to ask you a question because this came up as I was going through my book, and I really don't have an answer, but I was just wondering that I kept finding all of these sightings, not all of them, but a lot of these sightings, a lot of the things I was finding were concentrated around old iron furnaces, these abandoned like iron forges and stuff. Have you run into anything like that?
You said around abandoned iron what? Say it again one more time.
Iron furnaces, like the big old iron forges, like, these are like Revolutionary War era,
gotcha.
Where they would make,
they
make cannonballs and cannon stuff.
No, not so much around those, but I do get a lot of reports occasionally from abandoned. I got a report from a guy about 2 months ago who was talking about this homestead from the Civil War era, and he said what he saw was a huge orangutan, about 6'5", 7 foot tall, come out of the building, and he didn't know what to do. He didn't know what it was. So I don't know if they're using some of these old, it's easy shelter. But as far as the furnaces, no, I can't think that I've heard any of those. Wouldn't shock me one bit though.
It's an odd thing I found, and I don't know whether it's just because it's abandoned areas or what, but I just kept finding that again and again. Has anyone ever talked to you about Albus witches?
What's that?
They're reported as small creatures, hair covered like Bigfoot, and they were on the Susquehannocks had them on their war shields. The Susquehannock Indians when they were described as devils, but what they were is these little what has become known as albatwitches, which are hair covered, and they say they're 4 to 5 foot tall. Like they describe them as kind of man-apes.
Yeah. No, I have heard of those, actually. I take that back. I've heard a lot of reports of those. I hear they're very rare. The few Native Americans I've spoken to about them say they're very rare. The strange part is when you talk to the Native Americans, they seem to be kind of aggressive. But yeah, the 3 to 5 feet tall, 5 feet might be even too big. They call them the little people.
Yeah, I think that these are the same things. Locally, they call them albatwitches, and it's around here, like the general description people say it's short for like apple snitch or apple stealer, because they're known.
Right.
There was an area called Chickies Rock here that people would go and picnic at, and they said that these things would steal their apples and sometimes even throw them at them. And but what I found, Alp is German for elf, so I think probably it was a Pennsylvania German term, albatwitch, that there was either like an elf, like a combination German English word, like you're saying, it's like an elf witch or spirit witch, or maybe snitz is a local term for apples. It could have been like alb snitz, which would make it sort of like a apple elf or apple spirit if they were known for that. That seems to be more likely where the name comes from. But yeah, they were said to live mostly in the trees, and a lot of people say, well, they're just young Bigfoot, which, I mean, maybe not. I don't know, but
yeah, some of the Native Americans I talked to said it's a separate creature, but it is smaller. Something about the apple snitch does come to mind. I can't think of it off the top of my head, so you have to forgive me. But they did talk about this other creature out in the woods, and I've asked a few Native Americans about it, and they said they're really rare, and they're tiny, but they're not Sasquatch. It's something different. And one of the Native Americans I talked to, he said he referred to them as the little people, but they're very rare.
Yeah, I've definitely run into that. I've definitely run into little people. I've run into like megamawusos, I believe they call them, and it's odd. Another thing associated with them, which I don't know, they said they would play flutes and they would lure people out into the woods. Now, the flutes, I don't know. But the idea of luring people into the woods one way or another, and then people disappearing, basically.
Yeah, you see a lot of illustrations with them with flutes. Again, going back to some of the Native Americans, what they would say is they would lure people out into the woods, and they would try and trick them. I don't know a ton on it. It rarely ever comes up. But I have talked to a few Native Americans that have brought it to my attention that said, hey, watch out for the little people. And I've even asked some of the Cherokee and some of the other natives in the area, have you ever heard of this? And they'll say, yeah, it's the little people. But they're very rare, and you'll rarely ever see them. You'll rarely ever have a problem with them. And if you see one, it's shocking, even beyond Sasquatch.
Yeah, it's odd. I mean, I have a few sightings of that in the book, mostly road crossings. In fact, that's all I have, just sightings from cars. I heard stories. I mean, the people telling that they saw them when they were picnicking there. They had their apples stolen and thrown out at them. They describe sound like a cracking whip. They said that which to me, that could just be branch breaking. I would think that would, account for that. But yeah, it's nothing. I think I have 3 sightings in the book, but they were all from cars, every one of them. Yeah,
seeing a little monkey run across the road.
Yeah, pretty much. It's one was came up on it in his car and just saw it in the middle of the road. He said it turned around and its eyes shone yellow, and I guess he reported it, and a couple of his friends then told him that they saw like a really thin, hair-covered bipedal creature that crossed the road in front of their car a few years before. And then the Phantoms and Monsters website, they had one from July of 2008, a woman who was actually right outside the town I live in, Red Lion. She said she saw something run across a field, and it was a 4-foot-tall creature covered in hair. So the head was smaller than a human child of the same height, she said. really weird looking she was.
Yeah.
She pulled over and watched it until it just ran into the woods and, disappeared after that.
Yeah, and I've asked some of the natives, or is it just a baby Sasquatch or a young Sasquatch? And a lot of times when you talk to the natives, they'll tell you, it's something different. And they'll kind of describe to you how it's something different. But the term that keeps coming up is the little people. It's the little people of the woods, and they're very rare to see one. And they are, thieves. They're little panhandlers. They're little thieves. They'll take stuff from you. They're not... and they are aggressive, but they're aggressive in the sense of just wanting to steal stuff from you or take stuff from you. And they're bold in the sense of coming out in the open and doing it. But again, they're rare. But I honestly, Tim, I don't know a whole lot about it.
Yeah, I was just interested because the main concentration of those is supposed to be this Chickies Rock area, which has 7 abandoned iron furnaces in it. Which is, again, it's just something I kept coming across here over and over. I think I asked, I want to say it was in like the Outlaws Facebook group, and somebody there, I don't think it was Barracuda, but somebody there said they think they're eating the soil to get the minerals. They're actually eating the dirt. I don't know if that sounds right. I would sooner...
That's not too far off. I've actually had one report of them eating dirt.
Really?
And I thought it was... Yeah, I thought it was crazy. But I didn't know if it was a Sasquatch or what the guy was really describing. He said it was about the size of a baby chimpanzee, and it was sitting and eating dirt, and he didn't know what it was. He said it wasn't a chimp, but that's what it reminded him of, and it was a hunter that came across it. And he said it appeared to be eating dirt and eating bark. And bark makes more sense than dirt, but, because there's a lot of vitamin C in bark. But the dirt made no sense to me at all. I mean, I really had no idea what he was talking about. But that's interesting.
Yeah, to me, if somebody's seen them do it, they've seen them do it. I would sooner believe, and I'm talking about Sasquatch as well as these other creatures, that if they're hanging around there more than anywhere else, and maybe it's just that these places are in the wilds now, and people, maybe they're noting, oh, here's this furnace, and then I saw something weird, and they're making the connection that way, as opposed to I just saw something weird in the trees. I don't know. But if it is more, I would almost, at least previous to hearing that, I would almost believe that it was just maybe these creatures have some kind of interest in sort of abandoned, man-made structures. Maybe they're just curious.
It'd be nice to catch one. I'd rather catch one of those than a Sasquatch, that's for sure. But the name of the book is Beyond the Seventh Gate. Tim, I appreciate you coming on, sir.
Sure thing. Thanks for having me.
Thanks, Tim. And that's it for tonight, everyone. Remember, if you've had an encounter and you'd like to be on the show, shoot me an email, wes@sasquatchchronicles.com. I will see you guys back on Sunday. Have a good night, everyone. Welcome to the show, everyone. Thanks for being here tonight. Got a great show planned for you tonight. Going to be speaking to Virginia and JR. They had 2 separate encounters prior to them meeting, but Virginia's was very interesting. She came across what she thought was hay in the middle of the road, crouched down, and then it turned out she thought it was a grizzly bear. Then she really wasn't sure what she saw. And it's fascinating because she didn't really believe in Bigfoot. Very, very interesting story. JR has some very interesting stories too as well. If you've had an encounter and you'd like to be on the show, shoot me an email. My email address is wes@sasquatchchronicles.com. And I'm working on a couple other shows. Got a couple interviews in the bag for you guys. I'll be working on some videos too as well. So look for that on the website. Hope your night's treating you well. Let's jump into it tonight. Virginia, thanks for coming on tonight. How are you tonight?
I'm good. How are you doing?
I'm doing pretty good. I was interested in your encounter, and I spoke to you and your husband yesterday. For the audience, if you would, just kind of start from the beginning. Tell them what you were out doing and what you ran into.
Okay, well, this was probably about 2009 in Ruidoso, New Mexico. I was out and about probably about 1:30 in the morning, and nobody was out. I didn't see any traffic. I didn't see any other wildlife. And I was coming down a a pretty commonly traveled road, but this is a town in the mountains. So, I mean, it's common to see deer just passing by you, and you know, it's always a great surprise and a joy if you get to see something like an elk or a bear. But it happens. And so when I came to the end of this road, it kind of forks off. This road turns off to the right, and then it has like a little fork off. You can go to the left, and you cross this little creek and bridge, and then come out on the main road. So it's like all canyon, kind of north and south, running through that area. And as I'm coming down the road, I go to the end, and I go to the fork off to the left. It's a tiny little road with enough room, just a one lane each direction. There's not really anything on the sides except forest. And when I pull into that road, I notice that there is a really tall pile of hay filling up the whole lane. And it's right in front of a dumpster that is there. And I was confused, not wanting to go around it because it was such a narrow lane that I didn't want, and it was up at the top of a pretty steep incline. So if anybody was coming up the other direction, it just would have been difficult to see them coming up because there was a curve immediately. So I just didn't feel comfortable getting into the opposite lane to go around this hay. And I pulled right up to it in my 86 Suburban. So I'm in this really big truck, and the top of this hay is taller than the hood of my Suburban. And I go right up next to it. I mean, literally, if I'm a foot from it, I'm surprised. I really literally pulled right up to it. And I just sat there staring at it, trying to figure out what it was. And it was just, like I said, I really thought it was hay. It was just multicolored and like wheat colors, browns and blondes and red and just maybe different kinds of auburns, just a lot of different earth tones, and just really long and wispy, like I said, hay. So as I'm sitting there just staring at this, all of a sudden it's like this head turns and I meet eye to eye, like eye level. We are looking right at each other, eye to eye.
And you're in an 86 Suburban. I mean, so you're those things are tanks. I mean, let's be honest. I mean, you're sitting up pretty high up in those things. And so, I mean, God, when it turned and looked in your eye to eye, that would have scared the hell out of me.
I was so scared. I thought I pulled up on, I just knew I pulled up on a bear. And I'm thinking maybe, this creature was like I'm thinking maybe kind of like a 3-point stance. Like, I don't know if he was just kind of with, one leg forward and leaning over, kind of digging through some trash. I don't know, but the way that, he was just kind of squatted down, it was like all the hair just blended together, made like this mound. And again, like I said, teepeed at the top and then whiter at the bottom. And so he turns and looks at me, and we're eye to eye. And I froze, and I wasn't aware at all of Sasquatch. It wasn't I didn't have anybody in my life that like had an interest, as a kid, or I think I knew basically a Bigfoot. If someone said Bigfoot, I wouldn't be like, what's that? But it wasn't even a thought in my head at all. So the only thing that I can think of, that I related it to was a grizzly bear. And so this thing, looks at me, and I remember feeling like if someone's looking at you and they want to punch you, like, you know it. You can feel that anger. It's like there was no expression. I feel like there wasn't even an expression in the eyes. Like, I don't remember seeing any details in the face. All I remember is just kind of seeing these eyes looking right at me and feeling fear and feeling like this bear is going to punch my truck. This bear is going to make a fist. I had this vision of this bear making a fist and slamming it on the top of my truck, just being irritated with me. And all this in like seconds, and I'm looking at him, and I think I was just so terrified. Like, I don't even remember the point that he actually stood up, but I know that he did because I related the incident to seeing a grizzly bear. I told everybody I saw a grizzly bear because in my mind, the only movies I ever saw as a kid that would have anything that big in it would be like, I don't know, I think it was called Old Ben or something, where there was like that giant grizzly bear and the hunter standing below him and this giant grizzly bear standing over him on two legs, roaring and growling. And I'm like, that's my vision of anything that's bigger than a human standing on two legs is a grizzly bear.
Yeah, that would make sense. That's what your brain's processing. I mean, that would make complete sense.
That's exactly, what I accepted that. And that's what I saw. So the next thing that I remember, because it almost feels like if everything was, I don't know, like I can't go back to that day and that moment and then like recollect moment for moment. It's like it's just gone. Like I don't know what happened. Like I don't remember. I just remember the next thing I remember is seeing the back. I know that he stood up, and walked off because I remember seeing him walking just on the side of the dumpster, just into the forest, just walking off. So I saw him from behind, but still only all the color and the height. I never saw like definition of arms, shoulders, legs. I just know he had to be walking on two legs because it was huge. Of course, standing up, taller than the Suburban and taller than the dumpster. And I'm looking at it, and it didn't look back at me. I didn't see the face and the eyes again. I just know I just felt like it was just irritated. It just looked at me like so mad, and then just got up. It seems like in such a calm way and such a smooth way, just kind of moved and then moved off into the forest. But for me, it was so dramatic, and it was so like it was so angry, but yet it didn't do anything. I only felt that. Just like if someone is pissed in your presence and you know how mad they are, but they may not be doing anything to you. I don't know. It was just kind of, it was odd that I felt so much anger, but he didn't do anything, and so much fear. And then so much fear that I wish I could recollect more. Like if I knew more about hypnotism and being able to recall moments, that would be something in my life I would love to recall and try to get more details because I was so close to it. And I didn't have any idea that I'd even seen anything like that, any kind of, I guess you could say, undiscovered creature, until I went home that night, and I really was in shock, and I was just excitingly telling my husband that I saw this giant bear, a grizzly bear. And he was just like, really? He wasn't that knowledgeable of, I guess, wildlife and stuff. And he was like, okay, cool. That's wow. And then I would talk to other, my kids, like friends, their parents, and I would be telling them at games and stuff, I saw a grizzly bear last night or this week. And every once in a while, somebody would say to me, Virginia, there's no grizzly bears in New Mexico. And sometimes nobody would just say, they wouldn't say anything. And they would just kind of change the subject. And so I just stopped talking about it because it was a big deal to me. I was in awe over it. And finally, I just stopped talking about it. Years went by. I hadn't thought about it anymore. And I met JR about 3 years ago. And he had such an interest in your show, and he has a great love and an interest for the forest. It dawned on me. I started telling him about my experience, and I was like, oh my goodness, I think I've seen a Sasquatch. I was like, my whole adult life, I was telling people I saw a grizzly bear in Ruidoso, New Mexico. And there's no such thing. So I'm pretty sure I had an encounter.
Yeah, no, it is interesting. It's one of those things to where, I've spoken to a couple hunters now where they'll tell me that they saw probably the largest black bear they've ever seen running on two legs and not walking, sometimes bears can get up on two legs and it's not real sexy when they walk, and you can kind of, you can tell it's a bear. But these guys are talking about bears doing full sprints like a man. I guess if you don't believe in Sasquatch, that's what you put it to. Like, I just saw this really weird bear. The other thing I thought was interesting about your encounter is I went back and looked at my notes, and there isn't one, but there's two witnesses that I know of that described seeing what they thought was a pile of hay. And one was in the forest. These two guys disagree on what they saw. One said it looked like Chewbacca, and the other one said, I thought it was a pile of hay until it stood up and looked at us and then walked off. What was interesting about their encounters is the hair was really long and stringy. Most of it was covering the face except for the eyes. Just rather large creatures that they were running into, almost as quickly as you were describing it. Seeing it kind of turn its head, you see its eyes, and it's kind of hard to make out the rest of it because it's so long and stringy on it. And again, two witnesses I've had that I know of that describe it as seeing a huge pile of hay until it stood up and looked over at them. I just think that's fascinating because you don't hear that too often, but you do hear it from witnesses to where a lot of times I think when we think of Sasquatch, we think of like the Patterson-Gimlin film. There's not a ton of, there's hair all over Patty's body, but it's not really that long a hair. And he's run into some of these other witnesses and they talk about seeing long, shaggy hair on the thing, almost like straw. It's interesting. I think it's a fascinating encounter. Plus, two bears don't just get up on two legs and walk off. If it would have been a bear, it would have ran off on four legs.
That's right. And that's why in my mind, it was a grizzly, because it was like, that's what I knew grizzly bears did, and from movies. In my mind, it was like a grizzly bear would stand up over a person and be that much bigger than a human being. And that would be the only explanation in my head, for seeing that. So all those years, yeah, I did. I was so sure that my pile of hay was a grizzly bear. And it's kind of funny now that I have more time, I guess, that I try to spend, out in the forest, and we'll go out and get wood and cut wood ourselves and stuff. And it's like just being out there. It's a good feeling. It's a beautiful place, but it's wild to think that there may be different kind of species of creatures out there, even more than one style, that we don't know about. It blows my mind. And to think that I was as far away as the distance of the hood from my windshield and the length of the hood of my truck was the only distance between us. Things could have been very different. And like I said, I felt it. I could feel how irritated this creature was with me, but he was so smooth. He didn't do anything out of anger, but I knew it.
Yeah, and that's the other thing, too. I think the behavior of the creature in your encounter is interesting because, most of the time you run across a wild animal, especially out there in the middle of the road, and a car comes up, a good majority of predators will bolt. Sometimes you'll have your dumb deer that'll go across the road, but rarely will you ever see a cougar cross the road while you're driving or a bear cross the road as you're driving.
Well, and this road, like I was saying, that was my purpose in kind of describing like how this road goes, because most commonly the people that would travel this road, when they get up to that fork to the end, it goes around to the right, you know, it turns and it kind of, I guess you could say, like goes to the east. And most vehicles would travel that and just continue and go to the right. Like they're not going to go on that little tiny road to the fork to the left. I had lived there about, at the time, you know, I don't know, like 11, 12 years or something at the time. And I knew the little back road and had traveled it several times and crossed that little creek, and then you come out on the main road. And so when I went off to the left, he probably did say, dang, that truck's not going to keep going. Like, damn it. He probably just would have hoped that I just was going to keep on. He probably just froze thinking I was going to go, and then I didn't. I pulled right up on him. So, and then he waited there a good little while. So I think he was kind of hoping that I would like maybe stare at it and then move on, because it waited there while I stared at it, and until it finally just looked at me like, all right, fine, I'll get out of here. I'm going to move. And you really made me mad.
Yeah, and that's the other thing, too, is when he gets up and he just kind of nonchalantly walks off on two legs, you know, that's a huge cue right there that's probably not a bear. When you came up on it, it was 1:30 in the morning, and it turned and looked at you. Did it reflect eye shine?
I'm trying to remember. I don't remember. It seems like it seems like I just see like a really dark brown, almost like when you see, I hate to say like a stuffed animal, like a mounted animal that has like the eyes filled in, you know, like kind of marbly, but like in a really, really deep brown, almost black way. And I don't remember there being any other color. Like I don't remember seeing like any white, or it just seemed like it was just, I don't know about eye shine, but maybe like I'm picturing it kind of like marble, like maybe there was like a little bit of shine on it, but I don't remember it like being in the dark and seeing a cat and their eyes glow, like not like that, but it does seem like I'm remembering it almost just very dark marble like, but I don't remember any definition. Like I just remember that they were just big and dark, just really, really dark, like deep browns and reds, like almost black. But that's all I can remember about the eyes. I don't really, like I said, I don't remember much. I feel like I probably saw a lot more than what I'm willing to remember, I guess, because I'm thinking I was that close. I probably really saw a lot, like, and it was probably so devastating to me that I just, and I'm that kind of person to just like, if I hear something at night, I'm not going to be up all night worried about it. Like, I'm probably just going to pull the covers over my head and say a prayer. And if I wake up in the morning, I do. And if I don't, I don't. You know, I'm just going to pull the covers over my head and go to sleep. Because if I think about it, it would drive me like nuts. Like, I can't think about those kinds of things. Like, it would have been really bothersome to me.
When it stood up, was it taller than the Suburban?
Yes, it was, because I was calling it a grizzly, as like picturing a grizzly like the height of a door frame, or even tall, like I don't know how to explain, like something that's taller than you. Yeah, no, I understand. I've talked to so many witnesses now, and so I get a lot of things. As you and I were talking the other night, you know, you roll up on this thing, you think, oh, there's a huge pile of hay in the middle of the road. And as you drive up on it, you're like, okay, that's not hay, that's a bear. And then it gets up on two legs, and it, you know, kind of gives you that stink eye, like it's irritated.
turns and walks off. And your brain probably at the time is like short-circuiting. It's like, okay, that's not hay. Okay, that's not a bear. You know, and not really knowing anything about Sasquatch, I would imagine the only reference you had was, hey, I saw a grizzly bear, and I thought it was hay, and then it stood up, and it was monster size, and it turned and walked off on 2 legs. And so I could see your brain kind of short-circuiting because it's trying to process, like, what am I looking at? What the hell's going on here?
Well, I'd like to do a little research and find out. I mean, I've Googled a little bit, and I really haven't found the answers that I was looking for, but I kind of wanted to see what, if there really is a true, reliable, if being hypnotized is really a reliable source for memory. I don't really know if it is or not. But if it is, my gosh, I would love to try that. I think that, that might be something that if I find that it is, worth it, I would probably try it because I know that I was so close to it. And I just really believe that the reason I can't remember much more is because I really saw a lot more. My brain just won't accept it. So, and I think now that I have more knowledge of it, that it wouldn't be so devastating to me, that if I were to recollect it, that I would be able to, process it. So I would like to try that maybe sometime, if it is worth it. I don't know. Have you ever heard anything about, do you think that recollecting that way would work?
Well, it could. I mean, hypnotism is one of those things to where for me, I don't know that I could be hypnotized. I just don't think I could be hypnotized. I think you have to be kind of open to it, and if you're willing to allow it to happen, you may be able to recall some events. I mean, I've heard success stories of people, being hypnotized and recalling more events. You hear it with a lot of other strange encounters, people recalling events. There's a guy actually here in Portland, Oregon. I'll have to look him up. Maybe I'll ask Shane Corson from Monster X. He knows him pretty well. But there's a guy that does that, and he does this, and I don't think he charges anything for it. And he does it for Bigfoot encounters, to where he will hypnotize you. I think Todd Ness, I don't know if you know Todd Ness, he did it. And so there, it could be something if you want to look into. And I think at that time your brain just and try and tell people this, and everyone's kind of experienced it to some degree. It's like I was telling you about car accidents. Ask anyone who's been in a car accident what they heard. 99% of the time, they'll tell you they didn't hear anything. It was silent. And it's not silent. There's metal hitting metal. There's glass breaking. But if you ask someone who's been in a car accident, 9 times out of 10, they will tell you they heard nothing. And I think it's our brain's way of, you don't need your hearing at this point. You know what I mean? And you don't need that sense at this point because you're in survival mode. And you might have been at survival mode at the time, like I said. I mean, you thought it was a pile of hay, then you thought it was a grizzly bear. And I'm sure even when you drove off, you realized that probably wasn't a grizzly bear, but that's the only thing that makes sense. There's a lady, I've told this story like a million times on the air, so forgive me, but there's an old lady in Texas that claims there's these 3 black guys on her property that run around without shoes on, and they bang on her house at night. They throw rocks. She's fired shots off at them, and then they retreat in the woods. Well, if you listen to her description, I know people don't get offended by me saying black, African American, for all the politically correct people. And I asked her, and if you listen to her description of what she's talking about, these aren't human beings she's talking about. This is something completely different. But in her mind, when I spoke to her, she said, I don't believe in Sasquatch isn't real. Bigfoot isn't real. And I said, well, how big are these guys? She said, they're pretty big guys. One's like 6'5", one's probably 7 feet tall. The other one's really big. But it's 3 black guys living out on our property that just harass this woman in the middle of the night, all year round. It just makes no sense. You know what I mean? It's like, well, at what point do you realize it's probably not 3 black guys on your property? There's probably something else going on your property. Because I highly doubt year after year after year, these 3 quote unquote guys have nothing better to do than to throw rocks at your house or come up and bang on your house or.
Right.
once you start learning about this subject, all of a sudden you kind of start putting two and two together on some of these things. You know what I mean?
Yes, absolutely. And that's what happened. It was such an awe moment when I realized, it's like, like I said, JR and I have been together about 3 years, and it was just, it was such an awe moment for me when I realized, oh my gosh, I'm like, I think I've had a Sasquatch encounter. And he was like, what? And I told him what happened. And then, he was like, you should send an email. He's like, that is pretty cool. So I just wanted to share it. I wish I could recollect more.
No, and that's okay. And like I said, and sometimes in these encounters, it's hard to get that out of people. It's like the guy I had on that was attacked by one. I mean, this guy could tell me everything about the nostrils, and everything else was kind of vague when he was attacked and it actually jumped on him. I mean, he had some descriptions like the mouth was black, the tongue was black, but he wanted to keep going on and on and on about the nostrils. And I think it's because we get into these situations to where, when it turned and looked at you and you had that feeling like it's going to punch my car, that's even fascinating. Bears don't punch cars. Bears will rush your car and they'll attack, but they don't, and so even I think at that moment your brain was telling you that's probably not a bear. And the other thing too about bears, they don't have a look of disgust when they turn and look at you. I've never experienced that. Bears' expression, unless they're growling or they're, I've even had a black bear run at me one time, and I can tell you the expression on its face didn't change. It was showing its teeth, but the expression on its face really didn't change. And so
passive
for you to get that feeling like, hey, it's going to punch my car, and then it stands up on two legs and walks off, I'd imagine that you know what I mean? It's hard to give someone a hard time for not recalling too much, because God, there was a lot that happened there, especially in your mind in that encounter, going from hay to a grizzly bear to probably what the hell was that thing, where you're trying to process so much, you know what I mean?
Yes, yeah, I do, because I even even just joking around with JR, I'll look at him and be like, okay, that feeling of I'll make a fist and just kind of look at him, really close and be kind of just mad. And I'd be like, well, see, can you feel that? He's like, yeah. I'm like, that's what I felt. It's even though I'm not saying anything to you, I'm not swinging at you, I felt it. I had this whole vision in my mind that he was making a fist. I couldn't see his arms. I mean, they were in front of the truck. I was just eye to eye with it. And of course the body's, in front of the truck. And I'm thinking this thing in my mind, I'm visualizing him making a fist. And even though I don't remember there being any growling or the face squinting, or I just know when I saw those eyes that he was irritated as hell. He just wanted to slam. I could just picture this fist coming up and just slamming my hood and him walking off. But it's so odd that that's not what happened. It just stood up and walked off. But I knew that. I left with the feeling of knowing that I got away.
Have you ever gone back to that area?
Oh yeah, I traveled that area several times. It's a high traffic area in town, actually. So it really kind of surprised me that he'd even be hanging out right there. And in fact, the other night, JR and I were looking on Google Earth, and we were kind of doing just a bird's eye view of the area. And, there's the canyon and the Ruidoso River that travels all through there. And there is, quite a bit of forest and undeveloped land through there. But then there's also just a lot of houses scattered throughout. I mean, Ruidoso has quite a population in that mountain. I was surprised to see from the aerial version how many homes were in there. And, granted, a lot of the homes there are only occupied during the summer. But I would be curious to know how many people really have had experiences, especially after leaving their homes abandoned for so long and then coming back in the summer, and what they actually find. Because I'm sure that if I've seen that one there, there's got to be other encounters and experiences in that area. And I did try looking it up, and I found a couple others in that time area in 2009, but I really hadn't heard anything else lately. So I don't know. It kind of makes me think too that maybe they're like, maybe they migrate, maybe they just travel a lot. I don't know.
Yeah, I think in your situation, that dumpster was probably easy food for it. In most encounters, usually when I talk to some witnesses, I'll get like the actual location, or I'll get where their home's at, and I'll look it up on Google. And what I started finding was most encounters you don't have to go like 30 miles out in the middle of nowhere to have an encounter. Most of the encounters, there are homes scattered about. I mean, they live, I think, on the edge of civilization. I really do. I think that they live on the edge of civilization. Now, it may have been passing through in your situation, and it's just a theory that I have. But if you look up at some of these encounters and the locations, you'd be shocked. I mean, there's homes not too far away from a lot of these encounters.
Oh, yeah. Well, this is, it would be Hull, Hull, Hull Road, and headed south. And then the street that it actually curves and turns east is North Street, and that it follows into. And then so it's right off of that where there was a little road that I turned onto, and it's like I said, a tiny little road that crosses the river. But that's it. I mean, I don't know if there's people out there that like to kind of Google and see where different encounters happen and kind of see what the terrain was like around. I mean, that's pretty much where it happened, in that area there. And it's, like I said, very mountainous. There's water, there's the canyons, there's lots of deer, there's elk. And I'd just like to say too, like for the people that like, there's so many people that say like, well, they're so big, how could they be missed? I mean, it's amazing to stand in a forest and see a big giant elk and watch him move even 4 feet and disappear. And then in another couple of feet, you see him again. Like, these animals can just easily, they camouflage so easily. And if this thing, like I said, he looked like a big giant hill of hay. It really made me think a lot about how many times have we, been in the forest and been around one and not even known. Like if they're that still and they like to just camouflage and just wait for you to go away, who knows how many times it could have just been around them. But
I think that these things are very well, it's not hard to trick a human. It's really not. As you and I were talking last night, it's not, how many times I've been out hunting and I've sat on the edge of a game trail and hunters have passed by me. Granted, I'm all camoed up, but hunters have passed by me within 5 or 10 feet. And I really didn't feel like talking, didn't really feel like, had been out there for a couple days, hadn't slept well, was kind of grouchy, so I just sat in the bush. And as they passed by, you would think they would see me. And I'm a pretty big guy, and you'd think they would have seen me. And it's happened a few times in my life, and people just pass right by, like I'm not even there. And this is while I'm out hunting. And these are hunters, so they have their eyes and their ears open. These aren't hikers. These aren't, most of the time hunters go out there, and they're very alert on their surroundings. And they've passed right by me as I'm sitting in the bush. And I'm kind of in the open when they pass by me. And so I don't think it would be too hard for these things to hide in some of these areas. I know your husband, JR, had some encounters. Actually, before I do that, Virginia, I wanted to thank you so much for coming forward with the account and talking about it. I know it's not the easiest thing in the world to come forward and talk about it, but I really do appreciate you taking the time to come on.
Oh, I'm so proud to be a Sasquatch believer. I love it. I'm I love it because I'm aware. Like I feel like if somebody tries to make me feel uncomfortable about it, I'm like, well, do you spend time in the forest? I love it, and I'm so grateful for what you do and for doing it in the style and in the way that you do it. And it's nice to hear your voice and have a conversation with you, because even though you don't know me, I feel like I know you because I listen to you all the time. So I appreciate you. Thank you very, very much. And I'll pass you to JR.
Thank you, Virginia. Appreciate it.
Hey there, Wes. How you doing?
Hey, JR. Doing pretty good. How are you doing?
I'm doing pretty well, thanks.
Good, good. Well, I was talking to Virginia, very interesting account, and you had a couple of interesting, odd experiences out there in the woods. If you would, just kind of start from some of the things that you've experienced out there. I'd love to hear them.
Okay. Well, maybe if you don't mind, I'd like to go a little further back and kind of give you a little background of myself. I've grown up in the frequenting the forest with my father and brother, and harvesting firewood since about the age of 5. I was already on a chainsaw by like 8 or 9 years old, helping cut down and bucking up logs and stuff. I was just a kid, just enjoying myself. The first time I've ever had anything to do with Bigfoot was I was like maybe in kindergarten, and back then there was a reading program called the Riff, and you were allowed to go to the library, and they had certain books that were out there, and you could choose any book of your interest to keep. So I came across this one book, and it was an old book that was just titled Bigfoot, and it was just like a painted rendition of the famous Patty clip, and so I looked through that and read about accounts and that and such, and I was really interested in that. And then later on, maybe when I was about 7, 8, 9, I remember watching it was like a nationwide broadcast infomercial of Boggy Creek. I guess they were soliciting that video. So they showed the whole movie, and then they would take intermittent breaks to kind of promote their video and have you order and such. And so I watched that whole thing, and I was like, wow, that's pretty crazy, about the accounts that were in that movie. And then after that, I kind of started doing just research on my own. All this time I was still frequenting the mountains and stuff, but it never dawned on me, I guess you could say, okay, I'm in the mountains, so there's Bigfoot out here, or a possibility of. It just never I never put 2 and 2 together like that. And I started hunting. My brother started taking me out hunting about 10 years old, and I would shadow him all around the mountain and stuff, and learning and getting to know the areas that we go. And about the age of 16, I started, hunting by myself. I would just go out and make my own way through the forest and come back at dark, and it's been like that since, and usually when my brother and I go out, him and I are usually the only ones that will go hunting. I invite people here and there, and usually him and I are the only ones that go out. So when we do go out, we'll leave together and maybe walk together for about 30 minutes or so, and then we just start drifting apart. And he'll hunt throughout the day alone, and I'll hunt throughout the day alone. And then I don't know if it's just coincidence or just the way we are wired or instinctual or what, but at the end of the evening, we always manage to find each other somehow, come across each other, or just get a glimpse of each other 100 yards away, 200 yards away, and be like, all right, cool. So we'll make our way to each other, discuss the day, and then walk back to camp. I usually hunt in the southern part of the Sangre de Cristo range, which is in central northern New Mexico, and been going there I've hunted a lot of the mountain ranges here in the state, and for the most part, all of the mountain ranges, I believe, are suitable Sasquatch habitat. And I think they're super adaptive to any terrain that they're in. So one year we were hunting out in this area, there was a pack of coyotes that were this major valley. There's two major ridges that run north and south, and they run all the way into Colorado. So those two major ridges created a huge valley. In that valley is the Pecos River, the Pecos Valley. So we usually go up in there, and from the town of Pecos or the freeway I-40 north, it's probably about 25, 30 miles in, but it's still populated. You know, there's small towns here and there, or small communities. The very last one is there's like a general store and probably a couple of houses there, and that main road goes up into the forest probably about another 15 miles to the end of the road. And from there, it's like that's where all the major peaks are. And we usually camp from that little town, maybe about a couple miles up. The main road goes north, and then there's dirt road that kicks off to the east. We usually camp down there. There's a larger campground, but we don't camp in that area because there's too many hunters there. You know, we kind of like to be secluded and kind of away from everyone. And so one night it was probably about the second or third night there, and everything was normal, quiet, and, you know, uneventful for the most part. That night, after getting into my sleeping bag and, you know, getting ready to sleep, I heard these pack of coyotes, and they were further north from our camp, and maybe about a good half mile north. But, you know, it's being in the bottom of the canyon, you know, you don't have to really speak too loudly to hear an echo or hear, you know, especially in a really quiet forest, you can hear a lot. So these coyotes started going off, and I'm a pretty good judge of like distance and sounds, and, you know, so I was figuring there's probably about a pack of about maybe 8 to 10 coyotes, and they were just going off. And then shortly after they went off, I started hearing these like yells, and within the vocalization of those yells, it sounded like it wasn't just like a monotone yell, you know what I mean? It sounded like it had like various or numerous vocal cords, like different pitches at one time, but you could tell it was coming from the same animal, because with those different pitches, they were all doing the same thing all at once, you know what I mean? So it was just, and I could tell that whatever was making that noise wasn't so close to, it was further north into the canyon, but being that it was at a further distance, it sounded really, really close to the same volume as those coyotes.
What type of vocalization was it?
It was kind of like a high pitch, like a scream, but it wasn't like a really, it didn't seem like it was pushing to its capacity. It was more like just kind of like a steady, mellow, high-pitched scream, like, but it was like real up there, and like the kind of the same octave as the coyotes. I guess it tried to blend in or something with it, but yeah, it was just really high-pitched and long lasting. If I could even get that high of a pitch, I would do it for you right now, but I don't think I could. So, but it was really, really long and like moany, kind of a yell. It yelled for a little while within the coyotes going off, and then it stopped right prior to the coyotes stopping themselves. And I just kept, I had asked my brother the next morning if he had heard that, and he was like, no, I must have been out cold, you know, and I was like, oh, wow. Let
me ask you, have you found anything online that was close to what you heard that night?
No, I don't. I could definitely say no. You know, I've researched a lot of vocalizations online. Never really heard something like quite like that. But like for the rest of that night, I couldn't even sleep for hours. I was just, you know, being as far as I know it was, I was like shaking in my sleeping bag. You know, I couldn't sleep. I was just wide awake and shivering.
Which is interesting because, you know, you've grew up hunting, you've been out there cutting wood. This isn't your first rodeo out in the woods. And I'm sure you've heard cougars. I'm sure you've heard coyotes. I'm sure you've heard foxes. I'm sure you've heard, all the normal wildlife. And then this thing's, enough to terrify you. And I think that's interesting. You know what I mean? If this was like your first camping trip and you had heard something and it bothered you, I might say, well, it could have been a fox, could have been this, could have been. But you've been out in the woods. This isn't your first rodeo out there. And so to hear something like that, that's fascinating.
Yeah, it was quite shocking to me. And that is actually the first time I've ever heard like any type of vocalizations out there. And I'm aware of everything out there that makes any type of noise, from bluebirds to blue jays and robins and elk bugles. I could tell the difference, and I can more or less give you a size of a bull elk by the way it bugles.
What happened next? Did you guys just get up and leave, or?
No, we're not that type, we're not that type to, like, if something were to happen like that, we're going to stand our ground, and there's nothing out there that's going to make us want to leave, or, unless it's actually physically in our presence and, like, displaying some type of aggression or anything like that. But even then, I don't know, I'm sure we'd be more inclined to leave than not, but yeah, nothing. After that, that was the only vocalization during that hunt. And that was the last time we had heard something like that during that particular hunt. In that same area, I went through an oak thicket, and these oak trees were probably about the same, 4 to 5 inches in diameter. And there was a path, and this oak thicket was pretty big. And there was a path maybe about 50 yards long. And these oak trees were like, some were uprooted, but they were all pushed down in the same general direction. Like if something had walked through there and just like pushed everything aside out of its way. And everything in its way in the general path was like uprooted and like kind of tossed aside. So there was like a 5-foot path in this oak thicket, and I just found it really odd. And it was probably about 50 yards south of our camp. I'm not too sure how old it was, but it was just something odd to see. Other encounters I've had in that same camp spot in Pecos. My brother had heard something early one morning. I'm sorry. It was maybe a little before dawn. He had heard some vocalizations, but he didn't recognize it. And then the next day, I heard what he heard, but we didn't speak of it yet. And it sounded to me like, when I heard these vocals, I imagined a huge wolf, like standing 4 feet at the shoulders. And I could just picture a massive wolf, like just huge, because it kind of had like when a dog is kind of confused, and it makes that like that little like that confused sound. It's not really like a whimper, and he kind of like cocks his head to the side and like looks at you and makes those vocalizations. It was kind of something like that. It was probably maybe about 150 yards north of our camp in this canyon. And right there is where the start of the canyon is, because it's a river bottom. It started off about 150 yards, and it was probably about 11 at night. And then probably about 10, 15 minutes later, I heard it again. And this time it was about maybe 60 yards east of our camp, just right inside the tree line. And it only vocalized for maybe about 1 or 2 seconds. And then it stopped, went silent. And then I heard it again about 15 minutes later to the south, because there's a really big meadow just south of our campsite. And I figured it was in that meadow, and it sounded off maybe for about 10 seconds in that meadow. But the whole time it sounded like really, it sounded really deep, and it sounded canine-ish, but deeper than a canine. And it sounded, kind of had that same tone to like not necessarily a whimpering sound that a dog would make, but kind of like like how I described earlier, kind of like a confused sign, like a confused sound. Like I'm sure everybody recognizes that like how a dog would do that, And then so the next morning, my brother, because we have this tent that we use for a mess hall, so we were in there having breakfast. It was kind of a late morning. We were sitting there eating breakfast, talking about, the past week or whatever. And he had asked me, I asked him if he heard those noises last night. I told him, did you hear those noises last night? And he was like, no, what'd you hear? And I was like, well, it sounded like a vocalization, like a big dog or a big wolf or something. He looked at me like perplexed, I was like, well, he was like, well, the sounds out here, and that's what is it? And I was like, well, I don't know what it was. And then he goes, did you hear that sound the other night or the night before, the day before? It was real early in the morning. And I was like, no, I was out. And he was like, it sounded kind of like what you're describing too, but it was just real brief. And I was like, oh, that's crazy. Well, so we just continued on, then we changed the subject. And maybe about 10 minutes later, we were just sitting there, and we both heard it actually. And it was sounded like it was at the same point where it made the second vocalization that night that I alone heard it. And it just made like a quick little, maybe a second long, just a quick little vocalization. And we just stopped in our tracks, and we're sitting down, and it's, mind you, this is like November, so it's pretty frigid out there. So we had all the window flaps all closed up, and so we just peeped out the top of the flaps and looking outside, but we didn't see anything. And I was like, did you hear that? And he was like, yeah. And I was like, what did you hear? And he kind of mimicked it. And I was like, okay, we're on the same page now. And I told him, did you hear that last night? And he was like, no, but I heard that the morning before. And I was like, that's what I was asking you, if you had heard that. And he was like, no, but I heard that the night before. And I was like, wow, that's crazy. I wonder what that is. And we just kind of just like stared at each other with that with that same look, like our heads cocked to the side and like, what the hell is that?
Did you guys ever go investigate it?
No, actually, no. Like I said, we were kind of just, it was a late morning, and we were just kind of relaxing and kind of maybe bummed out about the prior days being uneventful in our hunt, so, but, yeah, so that was kind of crazy. In that same general area where we hunt, I've heard a lot of different unexplainable noises, I guess you could say. Found a lot of crazy things that I didn't understand.
What kind of strange things are you running into? I mean, what is it that you are finding that throws you off as being a hunter out there?
I had gotten off the main road, and this main road goes from that river bottom to the top of Elk Mountain, which is about, it's probably about 11,000 plus feet. And about halfway up, there's little roads that shoot off, and some go down to other places and continue on. And this particular road, it kind of goes in for about maybe a quarter mile at that. And then at the end of the road, there's a little turnabout. So we went to go check out, see if we see any sign or anything. And I had mentioned to my friend, oh, wow, look, there's an elk leg in the tree. Somebody must have been successful and, maybe just messing around and threw the elk leg in the tree. And it was like probably from like the knee joint down. So I was looking at it. We got down and I looked at the hoof and I was like, what? That's not an elk hoof. That's a horse hoof. And I was like, what the hell is a horse hoof doing in a tree? And right off of that little turnabout, there's a game trail that goes northward, but it's downhill. So I went down that trail just to check it out. And I noticed a horse carcass. This horse carcass was on the trail. Its head was facing north, and it was laying on its right side. So its legs were facing west, its head facing north, and it was it had seemed to me like something had drug it uphill from wherever it was killed. But also what I noticed was that on the ribs that were on the left side of its ribs, it had like a hole. The best way I could describe it is like a hole punched into it. If you were walking down a hallway and you were angry and you wanted to hit something, but you just with the movement from your elbow to your hand, like hit the drywall and you made a hole in the wall. That's kind of how I would envision something making that hole in the ribs of that animal. But it was clean. All the ribs were broken cleanly all the way through. And it was probably about a 6 to 8 inch diameter hole in the ribs. Whatever it was, I think had drug it up and lodged its rear legs between a stump that was in the middle of the trail. The stump was probably about 10 to 12 inches in diameter, probably about 2 feet high. It seemed to me like the way I could imagine it was something dragging this horse uphill and then the legs wedged around this stump and not putting the effort to like push it back down and work it around the stump to continue pulling it uphill. It just continued pulling it uphill until the leg ripped off and the rest of the horse was still intact. And whatever had pulled the leg off had put it in the tree. And I inspected that horse carcass, and it was down to the bone, but yet fully intact. I mean, fully intact. There hadn't been like any coyotes or any scavengers or any predator animals taking any part of it. It was that, and that to me is, I've come across elk, dead elk, and they're scattered all over the place. Deer bones scattered all over the place. This thing was so fully intact, and and that was just so strange to me because nothing survives that long being intact in the forest.
And that is strange. And if you don't believe in Sasquatch, what other animal could drag a horse? Horses are huge animals. Very heavy animals, and there's not a whole lot on this planet if you don't believe in Bigfoot. What else is going to drag a horse uphill, get its legs caught, and then just rip them off as it keeps dragging it uphill? I mean, it makes no sense. And it's interesting, too, the punching. It was an old encounter or someone I had on the show. I was thinking of this when you were telling that, where they had talked about finding a grizzly bear that looked like it had been punched in the face, and its whole skull had been smashed in, and it looked like a fist mark had smashed and killed the bear and smashed it in. Again, and I think that was actually a grizzly bear. So, I mean, what's going to hit a grizzly bear in the face and smash its skull in? There's not a whole, a grizzly bear is the biggest, baddest thing out there, according to science.
Right.
That's fascinating. Did you guys end up leaving the area?
Not immediately. We just I kind of poked around the area and looked for maybe more sign or, anything like that. And at that time I was like, well, like you said, the only thing that would possibly do this and have enough strength for this would be a Sasquatch, The only other explanation I could figure was maybe whoever owned the horse, if it died naturally or whatever, maybe had an accident, or maybe they tried to recover the horse to get it out of the forest or something, or I don't know what, but maybe they tried to recover it by its leg and then it got hung up. But, I think they would have tried to make a more of an attempt than that.
And I don't see someone trying to recover their horse, especially after it's dead. I mean, you're not going to take it to the vet, get its ashes, or, you know what I mean? You're just not going to do that with a horse. You had an incident with some lights, and I know it wasn't really Sasquatch related, but I thought it was interesting because I've heard it a couple times. Actually, I've heard researchers talk about it. And the funny thing about researchers is they won't talk about it publicly. But I figure if you run into something weird, why not talk about it publicly? Maybe someone else has run into something like that. But if you would, tell the audience about the light encounter.
Okay. This was during a hunt, Jemez Mountain region. And that's like maybe 60, 80 miles west of this range that I typically frequent. We had gotten dropped off with all our supplies and all our gear. in this one, it was the main ridge that runs also north and south. And we had gotten dropped off, set up camp. We actually tracked a bear, and it took us all the way down to the flats to the west. So by that time, we were just so tired. We made it back to camp at dark. We were just so burnt out. We didn't even cook anything to eat or anything. We just filled up on water and got into our tents and wanted to go to sleep and get ready for the next day. Maybe about 10 minutes after we had gotten to our sleeping bags, we started hearing elk chirping. We were camped in the valley floor, and to the east and west of us were slopes going upward, and the tree line. And within the tree line, we heard all these elk, and I would say I'm thinking maybe 25 to 30 elk, but they're just right at the edge of the tree line and probably 15, 20 yards from our tents. And they kept chirping and chirping and chirping, and I was like, well, what's the excitement about, And during their chirping, I heard, we started hearing this humming noise, like this, I don't know, it was like, woo, 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 and just constant, it wouldn't get higher in volume, or it wouldn't change any tones or anything. And me and my brother were in separate tents, and I told him, hey, do you hear that? And he was like, yeah. He was like, we were like, what is that? And I don't know, it sounds weird. So we kind of just left it alone for a second, and then it just kept on, and I told him, let's go check it out. So we both got up, we got dressed, we got our rifles, and mind you, this is probably about 9, 10 o'clock at night, pitch black. We started going down the valley towards the south. And as you're walking south, that valley tees up with another valley that runs east and west. And that humming noise was coming from that one particular valley to the west. And as that valley goes west, it ends up there where these ridges make like a kind of like a partial radius. So we started walking down that valley, and once we got to the T of the valley, then we started heading west. And as we got to that point, we could see like a ambient glow, and it was like a spherical ambient glow, but it was really, really broad. It was like behind that main ridge to our west, and you could see the silhouettes of the trees on the ridge, but it wasn't like headlights from a car. It wasn't, because those are more directional. It wasn't a spotlight of anything. It didn't move like if someone was searching around. It was just a real spherical ambient glow, and along with that humming, we're like, what the heck is that, So we both started walking to the west in that valley, and when we got to maybe about 100 yards where the valley ends, everything just shut down. And it wasn't like that ambient glow. It didn't just like, I don't know, how would you, it didn't just like, it was like an instant cutoff, like if somebody had turned off a switch. And right at the same time, of course, the sound, that vibration humming noise, it stopped as well. And as soon as it stopped, we stopped, and we just looked at each other and we're like, what the hell was that, And, I think this was probably late October. And so we decided just to stick around for a minute. So we climbed up a slope, maybe about 15 yards or so, and sat in the tree line, made ourselves comfortable. And we just sat there and watched and listened for about 45 minutes or so. The rest after that had shut down. Everything was real silent and dead, and just no noises in the forest whatsoever. And then we started getting cold and shivering, so we were like, well, let's go back to camp. And then we just kept talking.
What do you think it was?
Honestly, I don't know. I know what it wasn't. I know it wasn't headlights from a car. I know it wasn't someone with a search beam or with a spotlight or anything like that. I know it wasn't that for sure, but to tell you what it was, I have no idea.
Yeah, it's hard. It's hard to say. It's.
Yeah.
I always tell people you can run into more things out there in the forest than just Sasquatch. You'd be amazed at just some of the weird stories you hear from hunters. I mean, I've heard so many. I've almost become immune to it at this point because I hear all these, like, it's really strange, not really Sasquatch related, but really strange encounters with, everything from entities to lights to, and those people are it's hard to get them to come on the air and talk about it, because it's even goes farther than Sasquatch. It's like, well, I ran into, I could do a whole show on just some of the things people have told me they've run into, but they don't want to come on the show and talk about it. But I really appreciate you talking about that because that's interesting, hearing the humming noise, getting up, going over, seeing what it is, and then seeing this ambient light. I know this is a little bit, these two things may not be, we're maybe talking about apples and oranges, but I had an interview with a guy that didn't come on the show who ran into 3 dogmen, what he called dogmen. He actually didn't call them dogmen. He didn't know what dogmen was. He said it was a half man, half wolf, and I asked him, what do you mean half man, half wolf? And he said, well, it was a wolf, but it ran around on 2 legs. It kind of had a humanoid-shaped body, but it was definitely the head of a wolf. And he said before they ran into that, he saw this ambient light, and he heard this humming noise. And that's what they went to go check out. And that actually, the light went away. And while they were out there, he said he ran into these 3 wolf-like creatures running around on 2 legs, and then that's when they decided to get the hell out of there. And he didn't want to come on the air because he's like, hey, people are going to think I'm crazy. I'm talking about a wolf running around on 2 legs. Well, wolves don't run around on 2 legs. And he goes, I have no explanation for the light. And he said the same thing you did, JR. He's like, man, it wasn't car lights. It wasn't, he's like, we're in the middle of freaking nowhere. And I heard this humming noise. And he goes, I can't really explain what the humming noise was, but it sounded like, what did he compare it to? I can't remember what he compared it to. But anyway, he was saying that the humming noise didn't get louder, it didn't get softer, it was just constant. And it didn't matter how close they got to the light, it was the same type of sound when they were 100 yards back as when they were 100 yards closer. It's not like they were getting closer to the sound never changed. It's just weird, you know what I mean? It's just a weird thing to run into.
Yeah, and that's exactly how that's the same exact thing, as the closer we got, we thought it would get louder in volume, but it still stayed as loud. It was just like, it was that, I don't know, it just stayed the same volume at the closer we got. And then like the next day, I think we were on a 7-day hunt, and it was coming probably closer to the last couple of days. And the next morning we got up. It was still, the sun was barely coming up. It was kind of a late start for us again. We heard, just as we were, finishing up our last cup of coffee, we heard gunshots. And we're in this valley, and the slope to our east, it's not very too high of a ridge, maybe 80 yards or so uphill climb. And we heard the shooting, and we heard dogs, hound dogs, and we kept hearing shooting, probably about 8-10 rounds going off, pretty good caliber rifle, and then nothing after that. And I was like, who the hell is shooting this close to our camp, So I threw down my cup of coffee, got my pack on, and grabbed my rifle. And my brother was like, what are you doing? And I was like, I'm going to go see who the hell's shooting over here. And he was like, no, let's leave it alone. Let's go this way, and we'll flank them, we'll see if we can see anything. And I was like, okay. And no, nothing. We never ever saw anything. The dogs barking. I mean, they were like, I don't know if somebody was hunting bear, and they were running this bear with dogs. We heard those hound dogs, and then they kind of you could hear them barking, but they went off in the distance. About a week later after that hunt, we had went up there again, and we came across those hounds, and they're really skittish, and they were really gaunt, like they hadn't had any food for the week. And they they weren't afraid of approaching us either. When we pulled up and we saw those dogs coming out of the brush, we immediately stopped the truck, turned it off, and got out, and they were like happy to see us. And I mean, they were just so skinny, and so we gave them some food that we had, and we gave them some water, and we stuck around there just to see if anybody was hunting with those dogs. And we kind of drove around the area, walked around a couple of ridges, and we didn't see anyone. So we loaded up those dogs, and we kept them, and there was actually a guy. The tag on the dogs were from this small town just south of that mountain. I don't know for what reason he abandoned those dogs, but it was quite odd. And where we had found him was on the northern boundary of the reservation. So I don't know if he was maybe poaching bear, or I don't know what that situation was all about. But coming across those dogs, and we're like, these are the dogs we heard a week ago, and those dogs are expensive. You're not just going to have your hound dogs and abandon them and have to spend more money to replace those dogs. And those dogs were in for, even though they looked real skinny and stuff, you could tell in their health, they were in their prime health, they would be beautiful dogs,
Yeah, that is strange. Hunter's not going to leave his dog behind, especially a hunting dog. You're right. It's expensive. And if you don't buy one, you spend years and years and years training them for that. And, you're just not going to – that's like leaving your gun behind. You're just not going to leave your hunting dogs behind. Yeah,
so that was kind of odd,
Well, be careful when you're out there, Jer. I know when you guys go hunting. I know Virginia hunts, and just be careful when you're out there. I always tell people to don't give up the forest. I know it's easier said than done, especially after you've heard witnesses on the show and they say, I'm never going to the forest again. And I get it. I felt the same way for the longest time. But I always tell people, don't let them take that from you. Don't let the hunting stop. Don't give up what you love to do because of these things. They're out there. People need to be aware that they're out there. People need to be aware that you may come across an aggressive one, or you may just get one that just gets up and walks away. I mean, it's really, you're rolling the dice with these things. In the same breath, you can be killed by a cougar just as quick. You can be killed by a bear just as quick. Well, bear is kind of questionable, but... Yeah,
I've never really let it stop me or hinder me from going to do my thing in the forest. I mean, after those like non-visual encounters, I still go out there, but I'm a little more, not necessarily a little more aware, because I've always been aware, just because I'm out of my element. I'm still like, I'm still looking for my quarry, but in the back of my mind, there's always that little hint. Okay, well, what if I come across one of these things? But I don't let it like overtake my thinking and my logic. It's still in the back of my mind that there's a possibility I could come across something, but I don't let it stop me from pursuing my elk or my deer or whatever it is that I'm hunting at the time,
Yeah, I always tell people, when you come across these things, just treat it like you would a bear. I mean, just back away slowly. It's probably going to leave you alone if you just back out of the area slowly, and just treat it like you would, the same way you would a bear, even though you're in shock and it's shocking to see it. But if you treat it like a bear, you'll probably walk away okay.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, JR, I appreciate you coming on. Thank you for sharing all of your experiences, and thank you and thank Virginia for me for sharing her encounter. I really enjoyed talking with you guys.
All right, Rob. We really appreciate you, and we listen to you religiously, and we really enjoy your show, and really appreciate you getting in contact with us. It was really awesome of you.
Thanks, man. No, it was awesome of you to come on, so thank you for coming on.
All right, man.
All right, everyone, that's it for tonight. Remember, if you've had an encounter, shoot me an email. Wes at SasquatchChronicles.com. Look for Sasquatch Chronicle gear coming right around the beginning of September. Until next time, everyone, have a great night.
hardness, put on my boots and a lily white dress. A million words, but how to express what I'm feeling when I see you. You flash a smile, I'm like, is this happening? I look your way and then of course drop everything. You walk over and ask if I'm alright. Hey, whatever it takes to break the ice. Don't walk away, there's more to say. I just need the courage to let you know what's on my mind. Like every time you pass by, something just feels right. It's not apathy, it's energy locked up that's ready to scream and shout. I won't make the same mistake twice. Ready to shake up and break the ice. Maybe a joke first, maybe a pickup line, but either one of those is just a waste of time. I need a better way, I need some inspiration, something that better explains all my motivation. To meet you, know you, and be on your mind. I have to, but how do I put this right? Don't overcomplicate, just say hi or whatever it takes to break the ice. Don't walk away, there's more to say. I just need the courage to let you know what's on my mind. Like every time you pass by, something just feels right. It's not apathy, it's energy locked up that's ready to scream and shout. I won't make the same mistake twice. Ready to shake up and break the ice. Do you have a roadmap that I can try? 'Cause I think I just got lost in your eyes.